Cool. Hi, I'm Kristin, and I'm so excited to be here today. As you're going to hear, I kind of fell into the creative world a bit by accident and have only recently begun to really embrace my creative prowess. So I'm really excited to be here and share my story with you today. So as RJ said, the theme is heritage. And so I'm going to start, as most stories do, with my mom. You're going to see up here a picture of my mother and my grandma and my grandmother back in the 1960s. So at the time that this picture was taken, about 98% of all the clothing that was sold in America was made here in America, so vast majority. And then we're going to fast forward a generation to me, rocking my Billabong sweatshirt back in 2007 in college. And at the time this photo was taken, only about 2% of all the clothing that was made in America, or that was sold in America, was made here. So in this 40-year generational gap, a huge shift happened in the way that we produce our clothing. So I could go on and on about why this shift happened and what went on, things like globalization, NAFTA, finding very cheap labor markets around the developing world. But the story that I'm going to tell you today is more about how I, as a product of the fast fashion generation, became reconnected with the craft and skill of garment production in America. So this story actually doesn't start with clothes at all. I graduated in 2008 into a really bad economy, as I'm sure most of you remember. And so instead of going to get a real job, I decided to save up some money and go backpacking in Australia and Asia. So I did that, and after about a year of working and traveling abroad, I came back to the United States and decided to start a business with a friend who I had met while I was traveling. Her name was Shannon, and we would bartend at nights, and then we would work on this business during the day. And I remember just really wanting to work on something where I felt like I could finally live up to my potential. And I wanted to work on a project that felt really meaningful to me. So having just lived out of our backpacks for the last year, she and I decided that cute, stylish, multifunctional clothing for travelers was the business idea that we wanted to tackle. So as we all know here in Colorado, zip-off shorts are a big part of like the travel fashion world. But we didn't see anything that was like functional and fashionable all at the same time. So that was the thing that we were really interested in working on. So with absolutely no experience in the fashion industry, I had just studied business in college and she had studied journalism. We decided that we were going to start this clothing line for travelers and minimalists, and the focus was going to be on fashionable, multifunctional clothing. So as I said, we have no experience in the fashion industry, and the first thing we did was hop on Google and type in how to start a clothing line. And we quickly came across lots of books and articles and research about how our clothes are made in the world today. And I would say that this was when things really changed for me in my life and career. So we very quickly came across all of these books and articles, and the facts that we learned were really quite horrifying. So I'm just gonna share a couple of them with you so you get a feel for what I'm talking about. One of the first things we learned about was cotton, and about 25% of the world's pesticides are sprayed on cotton crops. So a quarter of all the pesticides made in the world are put on cotton. And this doesn't only go into our clothes, but into the furniture that you're sitting on, and our beds and our linens and everything else. And this is a really big problem in the developing world where misuse of pesticides is rampant. And this leads to a lot of issues with contaminated groundwater and illness and sometimes even death. Another issue that we came across is in the dyeing process. So if you look around the room, all of these bright colors that we're wearing are caused by textile dyes. And these dyes contain a lot of heavy metals. And especially in countries where environmental regulations are a little bit more lax, these dyes are often dumped into waterways. So this is one of the other initial images that I came across. This is a town in China, or it's a city, I should say, and about 40% of the world's jeans are made in this city. So if you're wearing a pair of jeans, there's a 40% chance that they came from this one city in China, where about 250,000 people are working on denim and jean textiles and manufacturing. So this is dye effluents that are going into the Pearl River Delta in China. And the last thing I want to talk about within the garment industry is there are a whole slew of human rights issues surrounding the actual sewing process of garment manufacturing. And this became kind of mainstream knowledge with Nike and Kathie Lee Gifford back in the 1990s. I know I remember those stories coming out in the news. And even though we don't hear about them as much, these issues still continue to plague the industry today. So aside from unregulated work days and underpaid workers, there are also really dangerous working conditions for a lot of people in these garment factories. And you may remember last year, in 2013, the Rana Plaza garment factory collapsed in Bangladesh, and over 1,000 people died in this kind of fashion-driven disaster. And I sort of rattled that off as like a statistic, like 1,000 people died. But when you really stop and kind of let that soak in, there are 1,000 people who died for the clothes that we purchase and throw away within a 6-month period usually. So the scope of this thing is really big and really impactful. And to give you even more perspective, there are about 32 million estimated people who are working within the fashion industry, whether it's from a cotton farmer to a garment production sewer. So this is something that affects a lot of people in the world that we live in. Now, until I had done all this research and learned all of this, I was totally clueless. I was like your very typical 20-something, Forever 21, fast fashion, bargain bin shopper. And I really never stopped to look at a label or consider where or how something was made or whose hands had touched the pair of pants that I bought at the store. So this was all totally new information for me and for my founder as well. So now that we kind of knew this information, we decided that we really wanted to do things better. So we did a ton of research. We tried to find the best textiles, the most eco-friendly textiles on the market, and we even took a trip to Central America to learn more about how our products are made. And we visited there an organic fair trade cotton cooperative. And while we were doing all of this research, we were also in the design process. So we were designing our first garments, and we, you'll see just a few snips here. We decided to put this up on Kickstarter, and we wanted to raise $20,000 to turn this idea that you're going to see into reality. And so we did all of the hard work, we put it up on Kickstarter, and little did we know that we were going to raise $64,000, which this was in 2011. So at the time, this is the most money that any fashion campaign on Kickstarter had ever made. And nowadays, if you guys have looked at Facebook lately, you've seen that you can raise like $64,000 for potato salad. So the kind of the world has really changed. But at the time, I promise, this was a totally big deal. We were in the New York Times in print, and Forbes.com, and the Wall Street Journal, and the world has changed a little bit, but it was a really cool time for us. We created this garment that is called the Versalette, and at the time we designed it, you could wear it about 15 different ways, and we've since redesigned it so that you can wear it 30 different ways. So here are some pictures that kind of look like mugshots, but I actually was taking photos the first time I ever made one of these, and I was inspired by that infinity scarf at American Apparel. And I remember thinking it would be really cool if you put some drawstrings in there, and that would make it more versatile and functional. And as I was making it, I just cut some little holes for my arms and realized that that would make it more versatile as well. So this is just like a little kind of peek into the design process, and hopefully that helps. Back to this Kickstarter. We now have 800 orders to fill from our Kickstarter campaign. We have $64,000 and a real business, all in 30 days. So this was when I really got my educational learning within the garment industry. So I learned about everything from the knitting of the fabric to the cutting and the sewing and every other part of the process. And I have a couple of pictures here as well to show you guys of a little bit of what that looks like. We used a knitting factory in North Carolina, and they made 100% recycled fabric for us. And then we also worked with a garment manufacturer in North Carolina who did all of the sewing for us. So let's see. In this process, I gained such an appreciation for the way that clothes are made, and we both did throughout this process. So we got to meet all of the people in every single stage, and we got to kind of see the whole thing with our own eyes. So we worked on this business for about the next year and a half, and it was like all Versalette all the time. So this was the only product we ever made, and we were really, really intense about it. So there was one summer where we even wore our Versalettes for 50 days in a row in all different configurations to help people figure out how to style and wear it. So you can imagine how invested we were in this idea. And at the same time, we were really interested in learning more about the world of sustainability and sustainable fashion. So this same summer, we went around and interviewed farmers and professors and CEOs and artists to talk to them about the sustainable fashion movement. From these interviews, there were 3 really big, crucial lessons that I learned. And the first is that experience leads to appreciation. During my Kickstarter campaign, I got to see the process up close in a way that most people never, ever, ever get to see. So a lot of us haven't ever seen our clothes being made before, and I hadn't either. And as someone who didn't go to school for this or come up around the fashion industry, it's this totally crazy thing. And I guess before that, I thought that machines made clothes. I'm not really sure what I thought, but I didn't realize how many hands touch each thing that we make. And it gave me this appreciation that I knew I really wanted to transfer to my customers in my next project. And the next lesson that I learned was that consumers hold the power and not corporations. And this was something that was kind of like hammered into our heads by all of these mentors and people who kind of knew what was up. And the interesting thing is that as an educated consumer, you can choose not to buy from mass-produced fast fashion that has a bad rap for its ethics. And the really great thing is that the more educated the consumer, the more real the change will be within companies. Because we all vote with our dollars, and companies are really just trying to make the consumer happy. And then the third lesson that I learned, you can go to the next, is that true 100% sustainability does not exist in the fashion industry. And this was like a total dagger in the heart, like gut-wrenching lesson for me to learn because I was such an idealist. But the truth is, whenever you're creating any kind of product, and especially fashion, there has to be energy use, use of precious resources like water, raw materials, and nothing escapes impact-free. This was kind of like the third and hardest lesson for me to learn. And my co-founder and I decided to shut down our business with the Versalette after about a year and a half after our Kickstarter campaign. Total first-time entrepreneur burnout. And I took a couple months off and was thinking about what I wanted to do next. And these 3 lessons really stuck with me and resonated with me. And I knew that the next project I took on, I had to kind of like use these in some way. So I started asking myself, what is the highest leverage activity that I can do to make change within this industry? And basically just how can I make an impact as one person? So you can next. And the idea that I came up with and my answer was to create an experience that fosters appreciation. And this is how my current company, Seamly, was born. So at Seamly, we, for the last year, have been using surplus fabrics. So that means excess and overstock fabrics from factories, mills, and warehouses around the United States. We take these fabrics and make women's clothing here in the Denver metro area. But my job really isn't to make clothes and sell them. My job is to create this experience that leads to creation and connection and gives a place for people to learn more about what happens within the garment industry. So the first thing we can do, you can go to next, is that we pull people into the process. We get people involved through our design process. So you can kind of see a little bit of what this looks like here. Our consumers get to vote on what we make next. So they get to choose designs, cuts, colors. They've even recently helped us decide how and where we're going to source our next fabrics from. So they get to kind of be a part of this interactive experience. And they can follow each step along the way, from the finding the fabric swatches to doing the cutting to sewing. So it's kind of like they own the process as well. And not only are they watching the story, but they get to become the story. And they create the products, they buy the products, and they get to see everything that happens in between. So the goal for us is to create this really interactive experience where people get to get that same appreciation that I did from watching the Kickstarter campaign. And they get to kind of experience everything firsthand as it's happening. And hopefully they get to share that appreciation with people who see them on the street and say, hey, I like your shirt, where did you get that? And then the consumer becomes the storyteller. And this, I believe, is where the real movement in sustainable fashion will happen. It's from people who have an understanding of what's happening with their clothes, and they're really interested in sharing what's happening with other people. So I really believe that we all need to understand where our things come from, because someone somewhere has touched every single thing that you own and every single thing that you're wearing right now, even your iPhone and your socks. And I think that we are all responsible for the human and environmental impact of the clothes that we buy and of our possessions in general. So as I kind of wrap up here, letting people into my creative and logistical process at Seamly creates this space where we all get to throw down our ideas and then watch those ideas grow. So I wanted to share a couple of the designs that we've made in the past year with the community. So you can just kind of flip through these. This is a dress that can be worn 5 different ways, although you can only see 2 here, long or short, as a long skirt or as a short skirt. And the next thing is a cardigan that can also be worn as a dress. And another one will be another dress that can be worn from long to short, and people here decided on the fit of the bodice and the neckline and the sleeves and the 4 colorways that we were going to produce in. And I think maybe the last one is a reversible sweatshirt, and people chose the colorways for this. And people are kind of always chiming in with their, make it a little bit longer, or a little bit shorter, a little bit more fitted. So people are kind of involved in every stage. And then the last one is actually what I'm wearing today, and this can be worn as a skirt or a dress as well. So these are just some examples of the things that we're creating together in this community. And so my role, as I said, really isn't to design and produce apparel, but it's to create this really transparent, inviting space where people can come to learn about and gain an appreciation for how their clothes are made. And my hope is that this leads to mindfulness with people's consumption and what they buy, and that they just give a second thought, no matter where their clothes came from or who made them. So in closing, now that you all are kind of a part of the Seamly community, I definitely invite you to chime in with any design ideas, feedback, even with our business model and our website. Those are all things that are kind of up for fair game to get feedback on. And I think that in this past year, if I've learned really anything, it's that everything happens much better when it's together. And that's kind of the basis for what I'm doing. Oh, that's a great question. She asked where I get my other clothing that isn't eco-friendly. And I think I may have bought 1 or 2 things in this past year, but for the 3 years before that, I stopped shopping for new clothes entirely, whether it was eco or not. So I would always go to Buffalo Exchange or Plato's Closet or the thrift store. And now I feel more comfortable supporting companies that are making clothes. And I think I may have a post on my blog about places that I kind of believe in and would shop. But yeah, the truth is no new is really the best policy if we're all being totally honest about it, even though I'm a clothing manufacturer. So I think that thrifting and consignment is definitely the way to go if this is something you really want to support. Yeah, so Jason asked what parts of the manufacturing process are really unsustainable and difficult to change. And I think that the textile production is the biggest piece. especially the dye process. So first, if you're thinking about cotton, like even if you're growing organic cotton, it still is so energy intensive to harvest this and turn it into a fiber. And then the next step is dyeing it, which I don't know of a process yet that isn't environmentally damaging. And natural dyes, you just can't do on a big scale. And also, whenever you think about that, the energy it requires to grow indigo and mustard seeds and all this stuff that you'd use for a natural dye, it just doesn't really work out too well. So I would say in the textile process are the biggest things that need to change in order for there to be like a huge leveling up in the industry. So the question is, at what point, not at what point are customers wrong, but is there a point where my intuition kind of sets in and it's like, is that what they really want? I'm not sure. They said so. And I think that's happened a little bit in terms of color. Whenever I let people just, I put it up for a vote, and whatever the top 4 are, like that's what we make. And I think that there's a little bit of safety because I give people the base for the design, and it's like, this is what it's going to be, in its basic form. So how would you like to change this and make it better for you? But what I found is that actually a lot of people are so in touch with what clothes look good on their bodies and their body type and shape, which is something that I'm honestly not as in touch with for every single person's different body type. So people are mostly giving really stellar feedback about, this is going to make my hips look too big, and I want my arms to cover here, or I want to show this off. So it's become this really interesting thing that's not so much about design, but about, this is what's going to make me look really good, and I want clothes that I feel really good in. Yeah, so Brandy asked if this community is all in person or web-based, and right now everything's happening online. I actually only sell direct to consumer, and yeah, the goal, I'm only a year old, but the goal is to create a really super interactive website where people are kind of drawn into what's happening, and it makes it really easy for people to participate. I think that question is two-part, one with the manufacturing, which is scalable. The community recently voted on sourcing fabric from the US and Canada, so mostly made in New York and Toronto. And so from that aspect, manufacturing is good to go. In terms of the feedback, I'm sure there will be a point where I'm like reading through, right now I read through 300 comments. And that's doable. I can do that in a couple of hours and make notes on everything. But I think that as things get more advanced, we'll also come up with more advanced ways for letting people design and give their input in a way that's kind of easier to automate. Cool. Well, thank you guys so much.